The paper bag of gas station coffee was still burning through Wyatt Callahan's fingers when a woman in a full wedding dress grabbed his forearm outside Magnolia General Hospital in Savannah, Georgia, and said the sentence that would rearrange the rest of his life, "Please. I need you to be my fiancé for 10 minutes. My grandmother is dying, and I can't let her go without seeing me married." It was a humid Thursday afternoon in July, the kind of Georgia heat that makes the air feel like a wet towel pressed against your skin, and Wyatt, 28 years old, a warehouse forklift operator running errands on his lunch break, had absolutely no reason to stop walking. But something about the desperation cracking through her voice, something about the mascara bleeding down her cheeks in dark rivers against white lace, rooted his boots to the sidewalk like concrete had swallowed them whole. If a story like this one, about strangers, grief, and the kind of love that shows up when you least expect it, is the kind of thing that makes your chest tighten and your eyes sting a little, do us a favor before you go any further. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, share this video with somebody who needs a reminder that good people still exist, and if you haven't already, subscribe to Kindness Matters, because we've got a lot more stories like this one coming your way. Now, let's get into it. The wedding that wasn't. Her name was Harper Quinn, and up until 11 minutes before she grabbed Wyatt's arm, she had been a bride in every sense of the word, dressed, ready, standing in a hospital dressing room down the hall from the oncology wing, waiting for a wedding that had already fallen apart without her knowing it yet. Harper's grandmother, a sharp-tongued, church hat-wearing woman named Eleanor Nana Vivi Whitfield, had raised Harper from the age of 10 after Harper's parents were killed in a car accident on Highway 17. Vivi had sold her late husband's pickup truck to pay for Harper's braces. She had sat through every Friday night football game in a lawn chair with a thermos of sweet tea, cheering louder than any parent in the stands. She had walked Harper through breakups, through nursing school, through the death of a childhood dog, through everything a mother would have walked her through if the world had been kinder. Then, 8 months ago, Vivi was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months. She was already past that. Harper had been engaged to a man named Beckett Sinclair for almost 2 years, a smooth-talking real estate agent with a good smile and, as it turned out, a much smaller spine than anyone realized. When Vivi's health started declining fast, Harper made a decision that surprised absolutely nobody who knew her. She moved the wedding up, scaled it down to almost nothing, and arranged for it to happen right there in the hospital's small courtyard garden, under a 100-year-old live oak dripping with Spanish moss, so that Vivi could watch from her wheelchair before the cancer took the rest of her strength away. Everything was planned with the kind of frantic, loving precision that only grief teaches a person. Paper lanterns Harper had made herself, strung along the garden fence. A borrowed speaker playing Vivi's favorite old gospel records. 12 folding chairs. A hospital chaplain named Reverend Otis Boone who had agreed to officiate on his lunch break. What wasn't planned was Beckett calling Harper 45 minutes before the ceremony to say he wasn't built for this kind of pressure, that watching Vivi get sicker every week had made marriage feel less like a promise and more like a countdown, and that he was sorry, truly sorry, but he couldn't do it. He didn't say any of this to her face. He said it over the phone, his voice flat as a Tuesday, while Harper stood in her grandmother's old wedding dress, the same dress Vivi had worn in 1968, taken in at the waist and let out at the hem, staring at her own reflection in a hospital bathroom mirror as the only man she'd planned a future with disappeared through a phone line. Down the hall, a nurse named Priscilla was already wheeling Vivi toward the garden, telling her how beautiful the flowers looked, how proud she must be, completely unaware that the groom was, at that exact moment, 31 miles away packing a bag. The stranger on the sidewalk. Harper didn't remember making the decision to run. She would tell people later that her body simply moved on its own, the way a drowning person's arms flail toward anything solid. She burst out a side exit near the hospital's employee parking lot, the closest door, the fastest air, still in the full dress, veil half torn from her hair, and nearly collided with a stranger carrying 2 iced coffees and a bag of breakfast burritos. She looked up into the startled brown eyes of a man she had never seen in her life, and something in her simply broke open. Before logic could catch up to grief, she was gripping his arm, talking too fast, explaining that her grandmother was dying, that the wedding had fallen apart 40 minutes ago, that if her Nana Vivi didn't see her married today she might never get another chance, and that she was so sorry. She knew this was insane, she knew he didn't know her, but would he please, just for 10 minutes, stand next to her and pretend? Wyatt Callahan had every reason to say no. He had a forklift certification test that afternoon. He had a burrito getting cold in a bag. He had zero obligation to a sobbing stranger in a wedding dress on a hospital sidewalk in the middle of a heat wave. But Wyatt had grown up the son of a single mother, Denise Callahan, who worked double shifts at a diner off I-95 and who used to tell her 4 kids, almost every night at that cracked kitchen table, that the whole world runs on people willing to be inconvenienced for each other. Wyatt thought of his mother. He thought of the way Harper's hands were shaking like she might come apart at the seams if somebody didn't catch her. He set the coffee down on a bench, wiped his palms on his jeans, and said, "Okay. Tell me what I need to know." 10 minutes that changed everything. What followed was the strangest 10 minutes of Wyatt Callahan's entire life. Harper's cousin, a bridesmaid named Destiny, sprinted to her car and came back with a navy blazer that vaguely fit him. In a stairwell that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, Harper rattled off everything Wyatt needed to survive the next 10 minutes. Her grandmother's name was Vivi. She'd raised Harper since she was 10, she loved Patsy Cline records and butter pecan ice cream and telling strangers in the grocery store that her granddaughter was the finest nurse in the state of Georgia. Wyatt memorized all of it in 90 frantic seconds the way a man memorizes a lifeline thrown to him in open water. Then, dress and blazer and borrowed dress shoes 2 sizes too big, they walked together into the courtyard garden, where 14 family members and Reverend Boone stood waiting under the great oak tree, none of them aware that the groom standing before them had learned the bride's name less than 15 minutes earlier. Nana Vivi sat in her wheelchair wrapped in a lavender shawl, an oxygen line resting beneath her nose, her face thin and pale from months of chemo but her eyes still burning with the same fire that had raised Harper alone for 8 years. When she saw Harper walking down the makeshift aisle beside a man she'd never met, her whole face lit up with a joy so pure it made grown men in the back row wipe their eyes with their shirt sleeves. She reached for Harper's hand with fingers that trembled now from more than just age, and whispered something that made Harper's tears come faster, something like, "You found a good one, baby girl, I can always tell." The garden ceremony. Reverend Boone, let in on the truth in a hushed 30-second conversation behind the oak tree, kept things short and simple, speaking less about vows and more about love, family, and gratitude for the time we're given. When it came time for Wyatt to speak, he found himself saying words that were somehow completely true even though the entire situation was built on nothing but a stranger's kindness. He looked at Harper, really looked at her, at the exhaustion and grief and fierce love written across her face, and told her, loud enough for Vivi to hear clearly, that watching her love her grandmother this hard, this unselfishly, was the most beautiful thing he'd ever witnessed in his life, and that whoever eventually stood in this exact spot for real would be the luckiest person south of the Mason-Dixon line. Harper wept. Vivi wept, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief she'd carried in her purse since 1974. Even Reverend Boone had to clear his throat twice and look away toward the moss-draped branches overhead. Under the dappled afternoon light, surrounded by people who fully believed they were witnessing a real wedding, Wyatt Callahan, forklift operator, stranger, son of a diner waitress, became, for 10 unforgettable minutes, the man who gave a dying woman her final wish. After the 10 minutes. Most stories would end right there. This one didn't. When the ceremony wrapped and Nurse Priscilla wheeled an exhausted but radiant Vivi back inside for her afternoon rest, the garden emptied out slowly, family members hugging each other, wiping their faces, already talking about getting food. Harper stood alone under the oak tree, still in her grandmother's 1968 wedding dress, watching the sun cut long gold lines through the Spanish moss, and felt the adrenaline drain out of her all at once, leaving behind something heavier and more honest, the full weight of everything that had happened in the last hour finally catching up to her. Wyatt could have slipped away right then. Nobody would have blamed him. His good deed was done, his 10 minutes long expired, his burrito ice cold in a bag on a bench 40 yards away. Instead, he walked back over, still in the borrowed blazer, and asked if she wanted to sit down for a minute. Not go anywhere fancy. Just sit. Harper looked at him like she'd forgotten he was still there, and then, for the first time since Beckett's phone call that morning, she actually smiled. They ended up talking for almost 3 hours on that same bench, the ice in Wyatt's coffee long melted, the Georgia sun sliding lower behind the hospital's water tower. Harper told him about being a hospice nurse, about spending her entire career sitting with dying strangers and their families, and how strange it felt to now be living the exact kind of ending she usually just witnessed from the outside. She told him about her parents, about Vivi raising her alone, about how Beckett's call that morning hadn't even fully surprised her, because some part of her had known for months he wasn't built for hard things. Wyatt told her about his mother working doubles at the diner, about dropping out of community college to help support his younger siblings, about still reading his little sister's old paperback novels on his lunch breaks because they made the world feel a little softer than it actually was. He told her, somewhat sheepishly, that he'd never done anything like this before in his life, that he wasn't the kind of guy who talked to strangers, let alone married them for 10 minutes in front of a hospital chaplain. By the time the parking lot lights flickered on, something had shifted between them that neither one could fully explain, something that had nothing to do with the fake wedding and everything to do with two people who had shown up for each other when it mattered most. The weeks that followed. Nana Vivi passed away 6 weeks later, on a quiet Sunday morning in late August, with Harper holding one hand and, at Vivi's own repeated insistence, Wyatt holding the other. In those final weeks, as the cancer took more of Vivi's clarity, she would sometimes forget the exact timeline of things, and she'd ask Harper, half dreaming, whether her husband had remembered to bring the truck around, or whether he'd eaten dinner yet. Harper never once corrected her. She would simply say, "He's right here, Nana," and Wyatt, every single time without hesitation, would answer. The funeral was small, held at the same little Baptist church Vivi had attended for 40 years, and Wyatt stood beside Harper the entire day, not as a fiancé, not as a stranger, but as something in between that neither of them had a word for yet. Afterward, Harper told him he didn't know her anything else, that he'd already given her more than she could ever repay, and that he was free to walk away with a clean conscience and a good story to tell at parties for the rest of his life. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment and said he didn't want to walk away. He said that somewhere between a borrowed blazer and a dying woman's hand, something real had happened to him, and he wasn't in the business of running from real things. The real wedding. If this story has touched something in you, if you believe, even a little bit, that kindness between two strangers has the power to heal wounds we don't even know we're carrying, please take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment about how it made you feel, and share it with somebody in your life who needs to be reminded that good people are still out there, showing up for each other in the smallest, most unexpected moments. Before we get to the ending, we've got one small but meaningful request. If you believe that a single act of kindness has the power to change the entire direction of someone's life, type the word blessed in the comments below. Harper and Wyatt would tell you, without a shadow of a doubt, that it can. 1 year to the day after that sweltering July afternoon in the hospital courtyard, Wyatt Callahan stood beneath that very same ancient oak tree, this time in a suit that actually belonged to him, tailored and pressed, nothing borrowed, and watched Harper Quinn walk toward him for real. No borrowed blazer this time. No desperate whisper in a stairwell. No pretending. Just two people, surrounded by the same folding chairs, the same paper lanterns Harper had rest-rung herself, and an empty wheelchair set gently beneath the tree in honor of the woman who had started it all. Two people who found each other because one of them was brave enough to ask a stranger for 10 minutes, and the other was kind enough to give an entire lifetime in return.